Put that pop gun away before you hurt yourself, old man." The laughter rolled down Lane 6 like a wave breaking on rocks. 5 young men in tactical caps and Oakley sunglasses, holding custom 1911s and competition Glocks, pointing with their chins at the worn little .22 pistol in the trembling hand of a 78-year-old veteran. Earl Callaway did not look up. He did not say a word. He just thumbed back the hammer with a thumb that had pulled a trigger more times than most men have spoken their own names, raised the small pistol with one shaking hand, and put 10 rounds through a single ragged hole at 25 yards. The rangemaster walked over slowly. He stared at the target. Then he turned to the laughing kids and said very quietly, "I need you boys to stop talking, right now. If you believe every veteran deserves respect, no matter how old, how quiet, or how small the gun in his hand, comment the word honor before this story begins. Because what happened in the next 30 minutes on that range is something nobody who saw it will ever forget." Earl Callaway walked the way old soldiers walk, not fast, not slow, but with that measured cadence that comes from 40 years of carrying weight your hips were never designed to hold. His left foot dragged a quarter-inch behind his right, a souvenir from a piece of mortar fragment that a Vietnamese field surgeon had decided in 1969 was safer left in than dug out. He wore a tan canvas jacket that had been new during the Carter administration, blue jeans bleached pale by the Texas sun, and a pair of brown leather work boots scuffed soft at the toes from 1,000 walks across the gravel of a small ranch outside Bandera. His hair was the colour of old snow. His hands, when he set them on the counter at Lone Star Indoor Range that Tuesday morning, showed a tremor that ran from his knuckles to the tips of his fingers. He had driven 80 miles to get there, alone in a 1994 Ford F-150, with a cracked windshield and a passenger seat that nobody had ridden in for 9 years. Not since his wife Marlene had stopped being able to make the trip. He came to the range the second Tuesday of every month. He brought the same pistol. He shot the same 50 rounds. He never spoke unless spoken to, and he never stayed a minute longer than an hour. Cole Mercer, the rangemaster, had asked him once gently why he kept coming. Earl had thought about the question for a long time before he answered. Then he had said, "Habit, mostly habit." But that was not the whole truth, and Cole had known it the moment the words left the old man's mouth. There was something in Earl's eyes when he held that pistol, something that was not habit at all. It was the look of a man visiting a grave. What Cole did not know yet, what nobody at Lone Star Indoor Range knew yet, was whose grave that little pistol had been carved out of, or what name had once been engraved on the slide before 5 decades of leather holsters and oily rags had worn the bluing smooth. The Lone Star Indoor Range sat on a stretch of frontage road outside San Antonio, between a barbecue joint and a tire shop. The building was cinder block painted the colour of weak coffee, and the sign out front was missing the second letter of Lone. Inside, the air smelled the way every indoor range in America smells: gun oil and burnt powder, and the faint metallic tang of brass that had been hot a few seconds ago. The fluorescent lights buzzed in their tubes. The old radio in the corner played classic country at a volume just barely audible under the muffled crack of pistol fire from behind the soundproof glass. The walls were hung with paper targets shot to ribbons, framed photos of customers grinning beside their first deer kills, and a faded American flag that had flown over a Marine forward operating base in Helmand Province in 2011. Cole Mercer had served 3 tours under that flag before a roadside bomb in Sangin had taken most of his hearing in his left ear, and given him an honourable discharge he had never quite stopped resenting. He was 38 years old now. He ran the range because the job kept him near the only world that had ever quite made sense to him. That Tuesday morning the range was busier than usual. Someone had posted a coupon online, and a youth shooting club had booked the back 6 lanes for a weekly practice. The lanes nearest the entrance were already occupied by a group of 5 young men who had arrived together in a lifted black pickup with a Punisher decal on the back glass. They had unloaded a small arsenal from the bed of that truck, Pelican cases stacked 4 deep, custom 2011s, a SIG P320 with a red dot the size of a cigar box, and 1 matte black AR pistol, covered in so many accessories that the rifle itself seemed almost incidental. Their leader was a tall, broad-shouldered young man in his mid-20s named Tyler Mathis. Tyler had played baseball at a small college in Oklahoma for 2 seasons, before a torn rotator cuff had ended that particular dream. And he carried himself the way men carry themselves when they have spent their whole lives being the biggest person in the room. He worked in oil services now. He owned 11 handguns. He had been shooting since he was 14 years old, and he was, by any honest measure, a competent intermediate marksman with a custom 1911. He had paid $4,000 for at a gun show in Tulsa. Tyler did not yet know that the old man shuffling through the front door of the range, the old man with the tremor in his hands and the canvas jacket from 1978, had forgotten more about pistol marksmanship than Tyler would ever learn in 3 lifetimes. Earl Callaway signed the customer log at the front counter the way he had signed it for the last 11 years. First name, last name, date, and a small careful check mark in the box that said self-cleared. Cole Mercer slid him his lane assignment and a fresh box of ear protection without being asked. Lane 7. Same as always. Earl thanked him with a small nod. He picked up the soft-sided pistol case he had brought with him, the same case, the same pistol, the same 50 rounds of CCI Minimag .22 long rifle, and walked slowly down the corridor toward the firing line. He passed the lifted truck boys without looking at them. They were standing in a loose semicircle around their own gear, unboxing magazines and fiddling with red dot sights, talking loudly the way young men talk when they want everybody around them to know that they are talking. Tyler Mathis saw the old man pass. He elbowed his buddy Jake. He grinned. Lane 7, Tyler said, just loud enough to carry. Looks like Grandpa came out to do some serious work today. Jake snickered. The other 3 boys, Ryan, Mason and Trevor, turned to look. Earl kept walking. He did not turn his head. He did not change his pace. He set his pistol case down on the bench in lane 7, opened it, and began to lay out his gear with the slow, methodical care of a man who had been performing the same ritual for 56 years. First, the small zippered pouch of CCI ammunition. Second, a worn microfiber cloth, neatly folded into thirds. Third, a pair of orange foam earplugs, untouched in their wrapper, although Cole had given him brand new ones at the counter. Fourth, the pistol itself. It came out of the case wrapped in the cloth. Earl unwrapped it slowly. He set it on the bench with the muzzle pointed downrange, as he had been taught to do in 1968 by a Marine Staff Sergeant named Hollis, who had never learned how to be gentle, but had known, even then, the difference between a rifleman and a man who simply happens to own a rifle. The pistol was small. It was older than most of the men who would shortly be laughing at it. The bluing along the slide had worn down to a soft pewter grey, and the grip panels were checkered walnut so darkened by sweat and oil that they looked almost black. To the untrained eye, it was a beat-up little plinker, the kind of thing a grandfather keeps in a sock drawer next to a folded handkerchief and a pocket watch that no longer runs. To the trained eye, it was a high-standard HD military, one of the most accurate rimfire pistols ever produced, hand-fitted in a small Connecticut factory in 1953, originally manufactured under contract for the Office of Strategic Services, and later issued in very small numbers and very specific circumstances to certain men who needed to do certain quiet things in certain quiet places, where loud noises would have been answered with loud noises in return. Earl Callaway had been one of those men, but none of the boys 2 lanes over knew anything about high-standard HDs. They saw a small gun, and small guns in their world were funny. Tyler set his custom 1911 down on the bench and turned around to face the old man's lane. He folded his arms across his chest. The other 4 boys followed his lead without thinking about it, the way wolves in a small pack always orient themselves toward the alpha. "Hey, sir," Tyler called out. His voice was bright and friendly, the way a man's voice is bright and friendly when he wants the people around him to think he's being kind. "Beautiful little piece you got there. What is that, a Ruger? Browning?" Earl looked up. He did not smile. He did not frown. He simply looked at the young man for one long second, the way a man might look at a passing crow on a fence post, and then he returned his attention to his pistol. "It's a high standard," Earl said. His voice was low and dry like wind moving through dead grass. 1953, Tyler raised his eyebrows in exaggerated approval. "Wow," he said. 1953. That thing's older than my dad. "You sure it still shoots, sir?" The boys laughed. Earl did not respond. He picked up a magazine, a small 10-round box magazine, scuffed and slightly bent at the lip from half a century of use, and began loading it 1 round at a time, his thumb pressing each cartridge down into the steel feed lips with the slow, careful precision of a man whose hands no longer worked the way they used to. "That's a .22 long rifle, right, sir?" Tyler called over again. "That's like a starter caliber. You shoot anything bigger? You ever try a real round?" Mason, the youngest of the group, snorted. "Hey, Tyler, easy. You probably can't handle the recoil." Trevor laughed so hard he had to lean against the bench. Ryan pulled out his phone and pointed it at Earl's lane, recording, with the small reflexive certainty of a young man who had spent his entire life turning the strangers around him into content for an audience he had never actually met. Cole Mercer was at the front counter, 15 feet away, sorting through a stack of waivers. He heard every word. He felt the back of his neck get hot. He set the waivers down. He started walking toward the lifted truck boys. He did not get there in time. Earl Callaway slid the loaded magazine into the well of the little pistol and seated it with the heel of his palm. The click of the magazine catch was a sound he had heard 10,000 times in his life. In the wet darkness of the Ashau Valley, in the dry yellow heat of a training range at Quantico, in the quiet pre-dawn cold of a deer blind outside Bandera with his son David, who would be 42 years old now if a roadside bomb in Anbar province had not taken him in the spring of 2007. He had not thought about David in 3 days. Now, with the pistol in his hand and the laughter of the boys in his ears, he thought about David. He thought about the way David had held this same pistol the first time, on a Saturday morning in 1976, sitting on a sawhorse behind the barn, his small 8-year-old hands shaking the same way Earl's hands now shook from a different kind of weight. "Easy, Pops," David had said back then, grinning up at him. "Easy, I got it. Earl racked the slide. The little hammer came back to full cock with a small dry click that the boys 2 lanes over could not possibly have heard over their own laughter. He lifted the pistol in his right hand. He lowered the muzzle until it pointed at the floor. He let his arm rest at his side. He took a long, slow breath. He let it out the same way. He thought about Marlene at home, sitting in the chair by the window, watching the bird feeder he had built her in 1981 from a piece of cedar she had picked herself off the back fence line. He thought about how she would not remember this morning when he got home tonight. She would not remember last week either, or last month, or the name of the man who had been her husband for 53 years. He thought about his platoon sergeant, Hollis, who had handed him this same pistol on a damp afternoon in October of 1968 and said, "Callaway, you got the steadiest hands in this whole sorry company. Don't waste 'em." Earl Callaway opened his eyes. He brought the pistol up. He laid the front sight on the black circle at 25 yards. He had not wasted them. Not one day. Not in 58 years. The first shot was so quiet that Tyler Mathis almost did not hear it. The little .22 made a sound somewhere between a sharp clap and a dry stick breaking, and the recoil pushed the muzzle up perhaps a quarter of an inch before the front sight settled back onto the target. Earl did not blink. He did not adjust his stance. He fired again, then again. The shots came at perfectly even intervals, 2 seconds apart, the rhythm of a metronome made of bone and breath. By the 5th shot, Cole Mercer had stopped walking. He stood in the middle of the corridor with his hands at his sides and his head slightly tilted, the way a man stands when he hears a sound he half recognizes from a very long time ago. By the 7th shot, Tyler Mathis had stopped laughing. By the 10th shot, the entire firing line had gone quiet because every shooter on the line, even the kids in the youth club at the far end, had felt, without being able to explain why, that something unusual was happening in Lane 7. Earl Callaway lowered the pistol. He set it gently on the bench, muzzle down range, slide locked back on the empty magazine. He pressed the small button on the lane controller that brought the target sliding back along its overhead wire toward the firing line. The paper target moved through the still air of the range like a small white flag of surrender. It came to rest in front of him. There was no group of holes on the black. There was one hole, a single ragged hole, slightly larger than the diameter of a nickel, dead center in the X-ring at 25 yards. 10 rounds through one hole, the kind of group that competition shooters spend 40 years chasing and never quite catch. Cole Mercer walked the rest of the way to Lane 7. He stopped behind Earl. He looked at the target for a long, silent moment. Then he reached up and took off his ball cap. He held it against his chest the way a man holds a hat at a graveside. "Sir," he said quietly, "would you mind if I asked you a question?" Earl looked at him. He did not answer. Cole said, "What did you say your last name was?" Earl said, "Callaway." Cole nodded slowly. He put his hat back on. He turned around. He walked fast now toward the office at the back of the range. Tyler Mathis watched him go. Tyler did not yet understand what he had just seen, but for the first time that morning, he was beginning to suspect that he had made a very serious mistake. 240 miles to the north, in a small office on the second floor of a brick building at Marine Corps Base Quantico, a man in a starched khaki shirt picked up his desk phone on the second ring. His name was Master Gunnery Sergeant Henry Vasquez. He was 52 years old. He had been a Marine for 34 of those years, the last 16 of them as an instructor and then senior coach for the Marine Corps Marksmanship Training Unit. He had personally trained 4 of the last 8 distinguished pistol shots in the United States military. He answered the phone the way Marines of his generation always answer phones. Vasquez. The voice on the other end was a little breathless. "Master Guns? It's Cole Mercer. Lone Star Range, San Antonio. I'm sorry to call you at work." Vasquez leaned back in his chair. He smiled faintly. "Mercer, how's the range?" "Master Guns," Cole said. "I got a man here. Walked in this morning. Old guy. 78, maybe 80. Drives in from Bandera every second Tuesday. Shoots a high standard HD." There was a short silence on the line. Then Vasquez said, "What did he just shoot?" 10 in one hole at 25. Off-hand. One trembling hand. Master Guns. I have never seen anything like it in my life. The silence on the line was longer this time. When Vasquez spoke again, his voice had changed. It had gone quiet and very flat, the way a man's voice goes quiet and flat when he is trying very hard not to let his hands shake. "Mercer," Vasquez said. "What did he say his name was?" "Callaway. Earl Callaway." The line went silent again, but only for a heartbeat. Then Vasquez said, "Mercer, you listen to me very carefully. You do not let that man leave that building. You do not let him pay for his lane. You do not let him pay for his ammunition. You give him the best lane you have. You give him a chair, you give him coffee, and you keep him there. Do you understand me?" "Yes, Master Guns." "I am 240 miles away. I am in my truck in 19 minutes. I will be at your range in 3 hours and 40 minutes. If that man tries to leave before I get there, you tell him personally, that Henry Vasquez is on the road to see him. He will know who I am." Cole said, "Yes, Master Guns. I'll keep him here." Vasquez was already standing up. He was already pulling his cover off the hook beside his door. He was already walking down the hall past the bewildered young captain, who tried to ask him a question and was waved off without a word. Master Gunnery Sergeant Henry Vasquez had waited 18 years to put a face to the name on the cover of the field manual that had taught him everything he knew. He was not going to wait another afternoon. Back at Lone Star Indoor Range, Cole Mercer hung up the phone and stood for a moment with his hand still on the receiver. His ears were ringing in a way they had not rung since the Sangin Valley. He took a long breath. He walked back out onto the firing line. Earl Callaway had hung a fresh target. He had reloaded his 10-round magazine. He was, with the same slow, deliberate calm as before, preparing to shoot another string. Cole walked up to him, gently, the way you walk up to a deer you do not want to startle. "Mr. Callaway," Cole said. "Sir, could I buy you a cup of coffee? On the house. Anything you need today is on the house. I'd be honoured." Earl looked at him. He looked at the coffee pot through the window of the office. He looked back at his target downrange. "I'd rather finish my string first," Earl said, "if that's all right." "Yes, sir," Cole said. "Yes, sir. You take all the time you need." Tyler Mathies, 2 lanes over, had been watching this exchange with growing confusion. He had not heard the phone call. He had not seen the target. All he had seen was that the rangemaster, a man Tyler knew to be a Marine combat veteran with a chest full of ribbons in a frame on the office wall, had taken his hat off in front of a trembling old man in a 1978 canvas jacket. This did not fit the script in Tyler's head, so Tyler did what young men of a certain kind have always done when the world stops fitting the script in their heads. He doubled down. "Hey, Cole!" Tyler called out, loud enough for the whole range to hear. "Coffee for the old guy? You giving every grandpa free coffee today? My grandpa shoots better than that, and you never offered him a cup." The other 4 boys laughed, but the laughter was thinner than before. Mason had stopped laughing entirely. Mason had been close enough to see Earl's first target as Cole had brought it back in. Mason had seen the single hole in the X-ring. Mason was 23 years old, and he had been shooting since he was 12, and he knew, with the cold certainty of a man who suddenly understands he's in over his head, that he had just watched something he could not do. Cole turned to face Tyler. His expression was perfectly calm. His eyes were not. "Son," Cole said, "I'm going to ask you, one time, as politely as I know how, I need you to put your weapon down. I need you to step back from the firing line, and I need you to be quiet for the next 30 minutes. Can you do that for me?" Tyler grinned. "Or what?" "Or you can leave," Cole said. "Right now, with a refund, and you will not be welcome back." Ryan, who was still recording on his phone, swung the camera toward Cole's face. Tyler folded his arms and looked at Cole the way young men with broad shoulders and no scars have always looked at older men with both. He was, in his own mind, deciding whether to escalate. He had no idea that the man whose business he was about to threaten had a friend 3 hours and 40 minutes up the highway, who had already been on the road for 9 of those minutes, driving hard, with the speedometer of his truck pinned at 20 miles over the limit and a face like a thunderstorm. And he had no idea that the old man shooting in lane 7 had once, with that exact little pistol, ended a war for a single Marine platoon trapped in a place no map had ever bothered to give a name. For the next 3 hours, an uneasy peace held at Lone Star Indoor Range. Cole had walked Tyler and his friends to the front counter and explained, in the quiet, patient voice of a man who does not enjoy being patient, that they were welcome to keep shooting on the condition that they kept their voices low and their phones in their pockets. Tyler, who had not actually wanted to leave, who had paid $200 for the lanes and the ammunition and would not have known how to explain the early exit to his friends, had grudgingly agreed. The boys had returned to their lanes. They had shot, but without enthusiasm. The fun had drained out of the morning. Every few minutes one of them would glance over toward lane 7, where the old man was still calmly shooting his slow, methodical strings. Every target Earl brought back showed the same impossible cluster of holes, some at 25 yards, some at the maximum range the indoor lane allowed, 50 feet. Some shot one-handed, some shot offhand with both hands. Once, just once, with his left hand alone, his weak hand, the tremor visibly worse, and still 10 rounds inside a circle the size of a quarter. Cole did not bring the targets to Earl. He kept them. He stacked them carefully on the office desk, one on top of the other, the way a man might stack pieces of evidence in a case he does not yet know how to argue. At 3 minutes past 1 in the afternoon, the front door of the range opened. The bell over the door rang. A man walked in. He was not tall. He was not young. He wore a pressed khaki shirt with sergeant's stripes on the sleeves and a row of ribbons over his left breast pocket so dense that the colours blurred. His boots were polished to a black mirror. His face was the brown weathered colour of a man who has spent 30 years standing in the sun. His eyes, pale grey, almost colourless, went immediately and directly to lane 7, as if he had walked into that building 1,000 times before in his sleep and known exactly where to look. He took off his cover. He held it under his left arm. He walked across the lobby and down the corridor toward the firing line. He did not stop at the counter. He did not look at Cole. He did not glance at the lifted truck boys, who had stopped shooting and were now watching him with an expression that was no longer arrogant. That was in fact the slightly bewildered expression young men get when an unfamiliar adult walks into a room and seems to bring the temperature of the air down with him. Master Gunnery Sergeant Henry Vasquez stopped at the lane divider behind Earl Callaway. He waited. He did not interrupt. Earl, who was in the middle of a string, finished his last 3 rounds. He set the pistol down. He turned around. The 2 men looked at each other. Earl Callaway's eyes, which had not, in 11 years of monthly visits to that range, shown any particular emotion to Cole Mercer or anyone else, slowly filled with tears that did not fall. Master Gunnery Sergeant Henry Vasquez came to attention. The crack of his boot heels on the concrete floor was the loudest sound in the building. He raised his right hand to the bill of his cover, which was tucked under his left arm, and rendered the slowest, most deliberate salute of his life. "Gunnery Sergeant Callaway," he said. His voice was hoarse. "It is the greatest honour of my life to finally meet you, sir." Behind him, 20 feet away, Tyler Mathis went very, very still. For a long moment, nobody on the range spoke. Earl returned the salute with the slight, formal precision of a man whose body remembered how to do it perfectly, even though his mind had not asked it to in many years. He lowered his hand. He looked at the Master Gunnery Sergeant for another long moment, and then he said in his dry, quiet voice, "At ease, Henry." Vasquez lowered his hand. He let out a breath he did not seem to know he had been holding. He stepped forward. He took Earl's right hand in both of his own, the hand with the tremor, the hand that had just put 48 rounds inside a 2-inch circle, and he held it carefully, the way you hold a thing you have been told a story about your whole life and never expected to actually touch. "Sir," Vasquez said, "I've been looking for you for 18 years. Cole Mercer was standing in the doorway of the office. He had a stack of paper targets in his hands. He had not moved. Tyler Mathis, 2 lanes away, finally found his voice. It came out smaller than he meant it to. "Excuse me," Tyler said. "Sir, Sergeant, what is going on? Who is he?" Master Gunnery Sergeant Henry Vasquez turned slowly. He looked at Tyler. He looked at the 4 other young men around him. He looked at the custom 1911 in Tyler's hand and the lifted truck boys' tactical caps and the iPhone still hanging at Ryan's side. His face did not change expression, but something in his pale grey eyes did. "Son," Vasquez said, "what is your name?" Tyler Mathis." "Mr. Mathis," Vasquez said, "the man you have been laughing at this morning is Gunnery Sergeant Earl Callaway, United States Marine Corps, retired. He served 24 years on active duty. He fought in 3 campaigns in the Republic of Vietnam between 1967 and 1971. He was attached to the 1st Marine Division, Reconnaissance Battalion, and later served with a Joint Special Operations element whose name I am still not legally permitted to say out loud in this building. He earned, in the course of those 4 years, 2 Bronze Stars with Combat V, a Silver Star, 3 Purple Hearts, and the Navy Cross." Vasquez paused. He took a long breath. After the war, Gunnery Sergeant Callaway was assigned to Marine Corps Base Quantico, where he served from 1975 to 1992 as the senior pistol instructor for the Marine Corps Marksmanship Training Unit. In 1981, on the range at Camp Perry, Ohio, he set the standing United States Marine Corps record for slow-fire pistol at 50 yards, a record which has not been broken in the 45 years since. The field manual that is currently used to train every Marine Scout sniper in pistol marksmanship was written, in its entirety, by the man standing in Lane 7 of this range. The silence in the building was absolute. Even the kids in the youth club at the far end had stopped shooting. They were standing in their lanes with their ear protections still on watching. Vasquez was not finished. "And the pistol in his hand," Vasquez said, "the little high standard you boys have spent the morning calling a pop gun. That pistol was issued to him by his platoon sergeant William Hollis on the 17th of October 1968 in a forward operating base in Quang Tri Province. 2 months later, Gunnery Sergeant Callaway used that pistol, that exact pistol, to save the lives of 23 men in his platoon, including his own platoon sergeant, who would have been the 24th man dead by sunset if Earl Callaway had not crawled 40 metres across an open paddy in the middle of the night, alone, with that pistol and 4 spare magazines, and done what needed to be done. Tyler Mathis opened his mouth. He closed it. He opened it again. He said, I didn't know. "Sir, "No, son," Vasquez said. "You did not know. That is the problem. That is the entire problem. You walked into a room, you saw an old man with shaking hands and a small gun, and you decided you knew everything you needed to know about him. I want you to think very carefully about how often you have done that in your life." Vasquez turned back to Earl. He was not finished. There was one more thing. One more piece of the story that even Earl himself did not know. One more reason Henry Vasquez had driven 240 miles in 3 hours and 40 minutes without telling anyone where he was going. Earl looked up at him. The tears in his eyes had still not fallen. He waited. "Sir," Vasquez said quietly, "my father was Corporal Anthony Vasquez, 1st Battalion, 7th Marines, Quang Tri Province, October 68 to August 69. The colour left Earl Callaway's face. "My father came home, sir," Vasquez said. "He came home because of what you did in that paddy on the 17th of December 1968. He came home, and he met my mother in a diner in El Paso in 1971, and they were married in 1973, and I was born in 1974. I have a sister, sir. She was born in 1976. I have 3 children. My sister has 2. My oldest boy graduated from the Naval Academy last May. Sir, there are 8 people walking around in the world right now, including me, who are alive because you crawled through that paddy with a pistol in your hand." Earl Callaway closed his eyes. He stood there for a long moment with his eyes closed, and the tears finally, after 58 years, moving slowly down the deep-weathered furrows of his cheeks. When he opened his eyes again, he looked at Henry Vasquez. He nodded once. He said very quietly, "Your daddy was a good Marine, son. He carried me out of there on his back the next morning when my legs gave out. He owed me nothing. We were even before sundown. Henry Vasquez nodded. He could not speak. Behind them, Tyler Mathis was crying. He was not pretending. He was not performing. The custom 1911 had been set down on the bench 5 minutes earlier and forgotten. His tactical cap was in his hand. His shoulders, the broad shoulders that had carried him through 2 seasons of college baseball, were shaking the way the shoulders of young men shake when they meet. For the first time in their lives, a reality larger than the one they have been building inside their own heads. Mason was crying too. So was Trevor. Ryan had put his phone away. Jake was sitting on the bench behind their lane with his face in his hands. Cole Mercer walked slowly down the corridor. He stopped at lane 7. He held out the stack of paper targets. Every target Earl had shot that morning, 50 rounds through holes you could cover with a coffee cup lid. "Mr. Callaway," Cole said. "Sir, I would be honoured if you would let me hang these on the wall of my range, with your name on them, where every shooter who comes through that door for the rest of my life can see what marksmanship actually looks like." Earl Callaway looked at the targets. He looked at Cole. He looked at the 26-year-old young man 2 lanes over who was still crying into his cap. "Son," Earl said to Tyler, "come over here for a minute." Tyler Mathis walked to lane 7 the way a condemned man walks to the gallows. He stopped in front of Earl Callaway and could not bring himself to look up. He stared at his own boots. The other 4 boys followed him, 3 steps behind, and they stood in a small, silent semicircle, the way schoolboys stand when they have been called up to the front of the room and do not yet know how badly they are in trouble. Earl looked at them for a long time. He did not speak right away. He picked up his little high standard from the bench. He turned it over in his hands. He looked at the worn bluing on the slide and the dark, sweat-stained walnut of the grips. And he thought, for a moment, about Hollis, and about David, and about the night in the paddy with the pistol getting hot in his hand, and the moonlight on the rice, and the men who would never see another Christmas because of what he had done with this small quiet weapon. Then he looked at Tyler Mathis, and his eyes were not angry. His eyes were tired. His eyes were sad. His eyes were the eyes of a man who had seen this exact young man, with this exact swagger, in 20 different uniforms across 20 different decades, and who had buried friends because of versions of him that had grown up worse. "Son," Earl said, "what did you think a marksman was supposed to look like?" Tyler did not answer. "You thought he was supposed to look like you," Earl said. "Big, strong, expensive gun, loud voice. That right?" Tyler nodded once. He could not speak. "That's what most folks think," Earl said. "Most folks been thinking that since long before you was born. They're going to keep thinking it long after I'm gone. Wasn't your fault you thought it. It was your fault you said it out loud in a place full of strangers to a man you didn't know," Tyler whispered. "Yes, sir." "You're going to live a long time, Mr. Mathis," Earl said. "Long enough to get old. Long enough to have your hand shake. Long enough to walk into a room one day and have somebody half your age look at you and decide you don't matter anymore. When that day comes, and it is coming, son, it is coming for every single one of us, I want you to remember this morning. I want you to remember how it felt right now, and then I want you to do better with it than I did." Earl held out his right hand. Tyler stared at the hand for a moment. The tremor was still there. The skin was thin and brown and dotted with the pale spots of 7 decades of Texas sun. Tyler took the hand carefully, the way he might have taken something fragile out of a glass case in a museum. Earl did not let go right away. He held Tyler's hand for a moment longer, and he looked into the young man's eyes and he said very quietly, "You're forgiven, son. We're square. Now go on home." Behind them, Cole Mercer was wiping his eyes with the back of his wrist. Master Gunnery Sergeant Henry Vasquez stood at parade rest in the corridor with his cover under his arm and an expression on his face that was almost unbearable to look at. Tyler Mathis went back to his lane. He packed up his gear without speaking. His 4 friends did the same. They carried their Pelican cases out to the lifted truck in single file, and they did not say a word to each other. They drove out of the parking lot of Lone Star Indoor Range slowly, carefully, like men leaving a funeral. But what none of them could see, what none of them would learn until 2 weeks later, was that the video Ryan had filmed earlier in the morning, the video showing the laughter and the mockery, and then the silent salute and the quiet reveal, had already been uploaded. And in 12 days, it would be watched 11 million times. The video went up on Ryan's account that night. Ryan had not posted it as a confession at first. He had posted it because he did not know what else to do with the footage of the most extraordinary morning of his young life, and because some part of him, a small honest part he had been keeping in a corner of himself for years, had wanted other people to know about Earl Callaway. He titled the video simply, "I Was Wrong." By Friday morning, the video had 400,000 views. By Monday, 2 million. By the following Friday, 11 million. The comments section, which on most internet videos is a sewer, was something else entirely. It filled, hour by hour, with Marines and soldiers and sailors and airmen and old veterans and young veterans and the wives and the widows and the children and the grandchildren of veterans, and they all said in their 1,000 different ways the same one thing. Thank you, Gunnery Sergeant Callaway. Thank you for our fathers. Thank you for our husbands. Thank you for our sons. Thank you for coming home. Henry Vasquez drove down to Bandera the following weekend. He brought his wife. He brought his 2 oldest grandchildren. He sat on the front porch of Earl Callaway's small ranch house on a Saturday afternoon, and he talked, for the first time in his life, with the man whose decisions in a Vietnamese rice paddy in 1968 had built every birthday and every Christmas and every quiet morning of his entire life. Earl listened more than he talked. He poured iced tea from a glass pitcher Marlene had bought at a yard sale in 1979. Marlene sat in her chair by the window, and she did not remember Henry Vasquez or his wife or his grandchildren or the war or the rice paddy or any of it. But she smiled sometimes when the children laughed, and once, when Earl walked past her chair, she reached out and took his hand, and she held it for a long quiet moment, and then she let it go. Tyler Mathis came down 2 weeks after that. He came alone. He drove 4 hours from his apartment in Houston, and he stood on the front porch of Earl's house with his hat in his hand, and he asked very simply if Earl would teach him. Earl looked at him for a long time, then he nodded. He walked Tyler around to the back of the property, past the cedar bird feeder, past the old barn where David had first held a pistol 50 years earlier, out to a small patch of cleared ground with a steel target hanging from a piece of pipe at 25 yards. He handed Tyler the high standard. He showed him how to hold it. He showed him how to breathe. He did not say much. Tyler came back the next Saturday, and the Saturday after that, and the Saturday after that. He kept coming for a year and a half, and slowly, very slowly, Tyler Mathis became a different man than he had been on the morning he walked into Lone Star Indoor Range. He sold the lifted truck. He started visiting his own grandfather, who lived in an assisted living facility outside Tulsa, every other weekend. He stopped recording strangers on his phone. And one Saturday afternoon, on the back lot of that small ranch outside Bandera, with Earl Callaway sitting in a folding chair behind him, and Master Gunnery Sergeant Henry Vasquez standing quietly off to one side, Tyler put 10 rounds through the steel plate at 25 yards in a single tight cluster, and Earl smiled, the first time anybody at that ranch had seen Earl smile in nearly 2 years, and he said, "There you go, son, there you go." Earl Callaway died on a Tuesday morning in the autumn of the following year. He died the way he had wanted to die, quietly, in his own bed, in his own house, with the cedar bird feeder visible through the window beside him, and Marlene asleep in her chair in the next room. He was 80 years old. Years. The funeral was attended by more people than the small Methodist church in Bandera could hold, and many of them, most of them, were strangers to the family who had driven from places as far away as Maine and Oregon and Alaska to stand in the back rows in their dress uniforms and their dark suits, and to say a quiet goodbye to a man they had only ever known through a video on the internet. Master Gunnery Sergeant Henry Vasquez, retired now, gave the eulogy. He spoke for 8 minutes. He did not cry until the last sentence. The little high-standard pistol was passed by the terms of Earl's will to Tyler Mathis. The handwritten note Earl had clipped to the case said, simply, "Carry it the way it was meant to be carried, son, with both your hands and a quiet voice. E.C." Tyler still has the pistol. He has never sold it. He never will. He shoots it once a month, at the same lane at Lone Star Indoor Range, on the second Tuesday of the month, the same Tuesday Earl used to drive in for. Cole Mercer keeps a small framed photograph on the wall of his office now, taken on the morning the salute happened, and beneath the photograph is a small brass plaque that says, "Gunnery Sergeant Earl Callaway, USMC." He did not need a loud gun to be a great man. If this story moved you, if you believe that quiet old men with shaking hands deserve the same respect as anyone in a fresh uniform, please subscribe to this channel. We tell these stories because we believe they need to be told, and because we believe that every veteran, no matter how forgotten, has earned the right to be remembered. Comment Gunnery Sergeant Callaway below to honour his memory. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. And the next time you see an old man with trembling hands in a quiet corner of a room, stop, look, listen. You never know whose grave you might be standing next to.